You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Hey.
Hey.
Loy.
Jack, what's up?
You know, I just wanted to say, last week we were talking about Paul Ehrlich, and this guy with the population bomb.
Yeah.
And I did some homework afterwards and found out he's, at least right now, he's 90 years old and still teaching, right?
Really?
Still winning honors and prizes. This is the guy, author of the population bomb, who said the Earth would be dead by 1980 and everyone would be dying. And well, we have twice as many people as we did then. And
I think he's kind of he's one of those guys where every day he wakes up, he goes, "Man, I wish I were dead."
well,
I mean, I can't. Every day I'm alive. I'm just wrong as hell.
But there's no shame in his world. He keeps winning prizes, right?
I'm sure he's.
And the reason he wins prizes is because he lives in a world of foundations and institutions that have no greater purpose than to keep him alive and afloat. This, by the way, I'm Jack Cashill and
Loy Edge,
and you're listening to Upstream with Cashill and Edge.
You know, that you're right about that. The entire foundation world,
right,
is their whole. They just create a giant smokescreen for BS.
Yeah,
and I'm sick of it. Because, you know, you hear all this stuff, and a lot of the dead guys that formed the foundations before they went south, you know, the Ford Foundation. Carnegie. Yeah. It's like these are radical, anti-human, leftist, criminal organizations.
Yeah.
And they're attached to just about every evil thing that goes on. I mean, it's a rolling credit after every evil deed brought to you by
the
Tide Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Franken, you know,
Annenberg Foundation.
Annenberg.
Yeah, you're like Tides. I was just thinking at the top of the foundation tree, like the Ford, Carnegie, Bill and Melinda Gates, which I think now is the biggest
Rockefeller Foundation.
Rockefeller, yeah.
I mean, the amount of damage that these rackets do,
right,
and they're really a catalyst they're in between the government and these things called NGOs,
right,
which just that term hacks me off.
Right, it's sort of like reminds of the last half of the song, B-I-N-G-O, B-I-N-G-O, right? Bingo was his name-o. We had a
non-government organization.
Right, non-government organization.
Why do you even need to say that unless the world's topsy-turvy and everything's screwed up? Of course it's a non-government organization. Governments are governments.
Right, you're not a government. Yeah, find a better acronym for your enterprise, right, NGO.
How about enterprise?
Enterprise, right. Foundation's good, you know, institute's good, organization's good, association's good, league, you know, call it what you will, but give yourself a name, right? Rather than be collected into this group of NGOs, 98% of which are evil, maybe 99 or 100, I don't know. But
Wokies. They're all woke.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite what, NGO or foundation?
Or foundation.
You know, the foundation, I think probably the Rockefeller Foundation has done the most bizarre, insidious things with vaccines, viruses, blah, blah, blah. Of course, now that Gates has stepped into the fray, they've got a great kind of 1-2 punch. The Penguin and the Joker are working together.
There they are. And, you know, I would say that they're probably on the Richter scale. You could, from founding fathers rolling in their graves, probably causing, you know, like 4.5, 5.0 quakes in various areas. So much grave rolling going on.
Brought to you by the Founding Fathers Grave Rolling Foundation.
Right. These people worked all their lives, you know, they weren't always scrupulous, but they all accomplished a lot. They all ended up with a lot of money to give away. And then you see things like, I saw this thing on the Ford Foundation, And they're talking about Henry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Henry Ford was a well-known anti-Semite and racist, right? But we're here spending his money. We don't care. You know, they don't say that. They distance themselves. So in 1973, the Ford family, whatever, I don't know what year it was, emerged as a separate entity from that evil anti-Semite Henry Ford, you know? Well, actually, Ford was an anti-Semite, but he was not a racist necessarily. This isn't.
He was an anti-Zionist, I believe.
Well, he was pretty down the line anti. I mean, he could break bread with Ilhan Omar or AOC and be in good company, but I know what I know is because I wrote a book about boxing. I know about Joe Louis's history, and in 1930,
you wrote a book about everything.
Kind of, yeah. Just I'm running out of stuff to write a book about. The memoirs of I'll ghostwrite the autobiography of Loy Edge. You know, be right up there with the autobiography of Malcolm X. I'll try to make it at least vaguely more realistic. But Joe Louis went to work for Ford in 1933, in the heart of the Depression, and in one of his plants, I think it was the River Rouge plant in Michigan, and then when he wanted to take a leave of absence to try his boxing career, the Ford granted it to him. Right? That's not, to me, hiring someone in 1933 and then giving him a leave of absence is not a proof of racism. It's a counterproof if you need a counterproof, right? Now he did put out he did his newsletter he was not fond of Jewish people, you know.
Yeah, I read a few of those. They're pretty rough.
But nonetheless, I mean, but if you're taking his money today, you shouldn't be distancing yourself. You should not be insulting the guy who gave you the money, right? And they do that.
Oh, yeah, they do. And, I mean, it's the whole idea of a foundation, I think we need to look at that. And I think we need to, and as far as the whole tax dodge aspect of it, and I'm one of those people, I don't believe that churches should be tax exempt. And I don't believe foundations should be tax exempt. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. If these guys are going to clamp these taxes on any kind of activity and behavior, they need to do it. This is where I come in with my equity argument. I believe that everybody needs to be taxed the same, and that the government should not be making judgments about what's exempt and what isn't.
Or what's what foundation is serving a useful purpose and which is not.
Exactly, because that's what it leads to.
Right.
And then they become this kind of catalyst between private sector and public sector to hide the transfer of funds.
Yeah.
It's a giant shell game, and really the foundations are a huge part of that smokescreen.
Now, I'm not sure about at which level they get taxed. Do they pay property tax? Do they pay? I don't know. I'm a little ignorant about this, but I do know that the Ford Foundation, for instance, gives out $500 million a year. That's a lot of money.
What do you mean they give it out?
In other words, their base is sufficient to produce $500 million in revenue every year. Their base grant or their base.
So they give $500 million in awards to recipients
a year, right?
A year.
That's major money.
It used to be.
Yeah,
hell,
right.
we're in the era of trillions now.
Right, for
You're
Zelensky.
talking chicken feed, man.
For Zelensky saying, hey, I can't even keep my my Corvette idling, in the cold here for that kind of money. I want big money. I want to hear billion. I don't want to hear million. Million is for suckers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have some experience with one foundation, personal experience, which was the Kaufman Foundation, which is here in. Mm-hmm. We live in, we're broadcasting out of Kansas City. In fact, out of the Real Media Studios, a great multi-purpose production facility in Overland Park, Kansas.
Fantastic.
Yes. And with our wonderful producer here, Carly Farmer, right there she is, smiling. Mentioned on the ever
Great job
time.
on the makeup today. I know, I'm looking good.
She's probably going to get kicked off the board of some foundation as a result of having been associated with the show. Not that she approves of this content. We don't know. But I was involved in a project with the Kaufman Foundation. It was established by Marion Kaufman, who was a legitimate billionaire and did good things, and he started the Kansas City Royals, for instance, and
Right. He was in the pharmaceutical.
right, and he started in his
Marion
backstory
Laboratories.
is great. I mean, he came out of nothing. You know, I mean, grew up in a little one-room farmhouse in Cass County out in the country.
Started it, I think, with some poker winnings or
That's
something.
right. He was in the Navy, good poker player, saved some money, comes back. He goes out as just a one-man shop selling pharmaceuticals, and he called it. He didn't when he was thinking of what to name it. He didn't want to call it Kaufman Labs because he's the salesman named Kaufman, right? And he said, "I'm not going to call it Ewing Labs because that's my name is Ewing. They're going to see right through that I'm." Just some guy sitting in a basement, literally. So he used his middle name, which is Marion. I don't know why they gave him the middle name Marion. They must have been angry at him, his parents did, or maybe they were in the forefront of the trans movement and were trying to encourage him. But anyhow, he calls them Marion Labs, and he literally worked at a one-man shop, selling pharmaceuticals, built it into a business, billion-dollar industry. Retires and launches the foundation in '67. With a very specific goal, and that is to promote entrepreneurship.
That's right.
And the vultures, I mean, as soon as he dies, I don't know what year he died, but even before he was died, I mean, he was probably still in his coffin. Still, they're probably at the wake, dividing up the goodies, and now we could siphon off this organization. Entrepreneurship. So. I wrote an article about this for a local business magazine, and it was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. I'm just guessing, and about how it was being used as a piggy bank for all these local, grifters. They didn't care about entrepreneurship, and lo and behold, I was unaware of it at the time, but the Kaufman board was aware of what had happened to the. How it had drifted. They all drift in the same direction. All the foundations drift the same way. All these left
mission creep. It's all the same.
Exactly. And the mission is always the creepers are always leftist.
That's right.
Some softcore, some hardcore, all with their hand out, all using their particular disability or marginalization to argue for why they should get money. And. But they hired a guy who was a serious entrepreneurial guy, Carl Schramm. I don't know if you ever met him.
No.
But Carl and I became friends, and
wasn't he a banker at one time?
He was. He came out of a. I don't think he was a banker, but he came out of an economics background, economics professor. He was a serious guy who knew how to make money, and had made money.
I knew of his reputation.
Yeah, and he was a really a good guy. He was. I mean, here's how this. I'll tell the story about him now. He's still alive. He's back in New York State, I believe. But in 2008, I went out to dinner with him and my wife, just the three of us, and she had been on me for liking Sarah Palin, for expressing admiration for Sarah Palin. And just out of the blue, Schramm started saying, "Man, I really like that Sarah Palin," And my Joan, my wife, really looked up to Carl Schramm, and then he says, "I said, oh, maybe I have to rethink my Palin phobia," But so he was a serious conservative.
Yeah.
And once that movement is made, though, right? Once those hands are being fed, once those mouths are having little worms dangled in them for doing nothing, like little sparrows, it's hard to deny them what they want. Right?
Exactly. I call the effect of these nonprofits the white hat, high horse, and halo, because they just take whatever their stated objective is, and they, like you say, like Einhorn boldly walking into the room demanding,
right?
Well, this is their white hat, high horse, and halo, puts them high above mortal men, and all this messy, ugly, nasty, buildy, businessy stuff. They have a higher objective, and it's really just stealing money and not doing anything for it. But the mission creep is always the same because of this effect, and people don't question it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a foundation. St. Joseph's aspirin. Oh, it's a foundation. It's got to be good.
Well, I mean, this foundation had the potential to be good, and Schramm refocused it
Yeah.
on entrepreneurship, on not on giving out money for people who wanted it for their pet cause or whatever, but for studies on how to make America more entrepreneurial, more successful. And at the time, because I was working through this business magazine, I said, we have the opportunity here because the same thing was happening at the Block School, the UMKC. And Henry Block was still alive, whom I got to know. He's a real gentleman, great character.
Really nice guy.
But so you had the basis for making a city like Kansas City, which has a nuts and boltsy kind of farm background, agricultural, agribusiness.
It's a hub
of entrepreneurship, a place where entrepreneurs would be welcome and encouraged, and where regulation would be minimal. And you're sitting in a state that is historically red, Kansas on the one side and Missouri turning redder by the day. And it could have been that, but it wasn't.
No.
Because what happened is those forces got together. They used their halos and like frisbees, and they drove Schramm out of town.
And they became just a glorified consultancy.
Right.
Basically a for-profit consultancy under the guise of some sort of humanitarian, the white hat, high horse, and halo. But actually what they were doing was they were using all that for credibility to hook in people who would essentially bring them in as business consultants.
Yeah.
And so it became kind of a, I don't want to say it was a racket or anything like that, but it became, it had advantages that possibly weren't really earned.
Well, I mean, all foundations have the potential of becoming a racket, but they also have the potential of honoring their founders' mission. And for a while under Schramm, that's exactly what they were doing, but they could not be allowed to do that. Meanwhile, at the Block School, gosh, I don't know if you know about that, but they turned to China for their leading light. This guy, Michael Song. I met these people because I did a documentary on Henry Block while he was still alive. And at the time, they were, kicking butt, becoming, really establishing themselves. Except to do it, they were fudging all their numbers. They got caught, became a big scandal. And then the University of Missouri just sort of protected itself, and they blamed, they punished the whistleblowers and retrenched. And so at the moment that a city like Kansas City had to actually define itself as entrepreneurial was lost. And today,
two great men.
Yeah.
Who really were fantastic entrepreneurs.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet they cabbaged onto their legacy,
right,
and turned it into again just another foundation.
Right, because Henry Block's, I interviewed him for this documentary. I had met him before, and the interview lasted about 2 hours. And by this time, he's in his 90s or about 90. And he's talking about building his business, H&R Block, the tax, which they started again just out of their basement kind of thing.
Yeah.
He and his brother
another
Richard.
post-World War II.
Yeah, success story. And like Kaufman, Block had been in World War II. And at the end, I said, "Is there anything? Was there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you thought might have been interesting?" He goes, "Well, there were those 30 missions I flew over Germany in a B-17, and as a navigator." Oh, yeah, I guess that kind of counts. That's I think memorable. I said, any particular mission stand out? He goes, well, D-Day. Well, yeah, I heard of that. And these guys are so modest about this.
Very humble guys.
Right. They create these great fortunes honestly in both their cases. And the Blocks are just really way above board. I mean, they were just really.
And I went to school with some of the kids.
Yeah.
That extremely well-mannered and
Oh, they're
polite.
such nice kids. I say kids.
They're old like me now.
Yeah, they're about your age. But I, since I was working with Henry, I always thought of them as his children. So I thought of them as children. There's 4 of them. What I thought was really beautiful about the Block family was that all 4 of his children were living within a mile of his house when he died, right? And Henry loved his wife to death, and she preceded him in death, and the kids loved their parents. I mean, it's like having the Ozzie and Ricky Nelson family idealized in the hands of a billionaire.
They were extremely well raised.
Yeah, and it could happen, and then everyone tries to take their money and run at the end of the day, So, in their case, they gave a lot of their money to. Now that I see at least if you dedicate it to a building like Nelson, that exists, they can't change the mission of it. I'm sure they can try, but they could spoil anything. So, for instance, Henry Block gives $100 million for the expansion of the local art museum, Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, and I'm a member. I'm a member of the Friends of Nelson or whatever. I go to art museum and they bring in a movie theater. I like that. I know the people at the movie theater, and I have good feelings towards the whole enterprise. By this time, Henry's died, and then the George Floyd breaks out. The George Floyd riots break out here in Kansas City, like they did every place. A nicely orchestrated exercise in which I'm sure many NGOs across the country participated, given its synchronization nationally and the way they've exploited it since, and I'll talk about that in a second. So what do? The Kansas City, the Nelson Atkins Museum is only 2 blocks from the central staging area of our largely peaceful protests. And, this is one of those words, right? When you and I use the word largely peaceful protest, we used it in jest, and we presume our audience knows.
Mostly peaceful protest, yeah.
But
you got to see burning stuff in the background when you...
But there's a certain audience that if I said a largely peaceful protest, it's like when I say global warming when it was 6 degrees below zero, It's like, oh, yeah, that one's global warming? Oh, yeah, right. Largely. So the new director of the Nelson Atkins, who is, I think he was born in Europe or Spain or someplace. His grandfather was a communist, whatever. I believe. I'm just saying this. When he hears that the police are using the parking lot as a staging area because it's only 2 blocks.
I remember this.
He demands
signal.
And this is the way they think and work. He demands that they withdraw because they've been working to build communication with the neighborhood or whatever, the marginalized people who are not historically going to the Nelson and still aren't and I just call it. We say I cancel my membership and I know other people did too who were paying attention. It was just so perfectly symbolic of the way these institutional leaders think, right?
Yeah, and when they get together, it's a multiplicative effect.
Yeah,
it just gets crazy, and the way people jump from foundations to government,
right,
and back and forth.
Yep,
it is a big staging area for graft. It's a big staging area for obfuscation. People hide in there. The money gets hidden in there.
Yeah.
This is why I say completely do away with that tax free, that tax exempt status.
Yeah.
And tax everybody. Tax the parish. Tax everybody. Because that will bring more pressure upon government from more people to be fairer with the tax policies, and it'll bring more exposure.
Sunlight.
Yeah, sunlight.
The best disinfectant. No, and it's and you see that it would also, I think, force people to be more the people who give, the people who contribute to these enterprises unknowingly. it would give them more opportunity to see what's going on.
Exactly.
But they don't. Do you have any personal experience with these enterprises, these NGOs or foundations?
Yes, all the time. I mean, on so many levels. When I was, I've fought. I've had several businesses.
Yeah.
And many of them, there was pressure, political pressure brought on one business. Maybe it was a smoking-related thing at one of the cigar stores or one of the bars. The pressures from the city, do-gooders and the different groups that. I mean, I can't think of a specific instance right now that I'd be willing to talk about.
Did you ever get squeezed by the United Fund?
Oh, yeah.
All the time?
Oh, yeah.
Did you participate or?
No, I don't believe in that one. And
No, I don't believe in it
I
either.
never have.
Because what happens is
It's a racket.
and they're also susceptible to pressures from the outside. So,
Yes.
this year we're not including the Boy Scouts of America, right? And then they'll come to your office and say, but we're all inclusive and embracive. No, we're not including the Salvation Army or the Boy Scouts or City Union Mission or any place that doesn't celebrate, LGBT bullshit, you know? And that happens everywhere. I'm
Catholic Church. Look at Vatican II.
Yeah.
All right. I stumbled onto this. I did a little bit of research on. I was thinking, why Vatican II? What caused that to happen? And Pope John the 23rd, he was excited about UNESCO.
Right.
He loved that.
Yeah.
Oh, the UN comes out and they're eugenicists. UNESCO's a eugenicist organization.
Right.
We got to be more like this. So they trot out the Vatican II. But the UN, and then all of these related foundations that support UN initiatives.
Right.
Catholic Charities, which is the big Catholic foundation that does all kinds of good work. They also do all kinds of questionable, leftist, radical, anti-American.
And especially in their encouragement of illegal immigration and their endorsement of it.
Yeah.
Which is a problem.
And physical, their actual participation in the process.
Yeah.
And there's so much shady stuff going on in that world as far as where they place children, the sex trafficking, the drugs, again, it's obfuscation. That's what they do in foundations. Nobody questions it. There's no sunlight on it. It's all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
Well, let's get back to that ultimate NGO, the United Nations. And you know who the first Secretary General was when they were putting it together? This will feed your conspiracy theory, not conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories now we are saying now are just in anticipation of the future.
I'm going to guess it was a Huxley or something.
Oh, worse, Alger Hiss.
Alger Hiss.
Now,
That's right.
For those who do not know Alger Hiss, this is a great story, and I may have even told bits and pieces of it before. But Alger Hiss was a Soviet agent, and as early as 1941, Whittaker Chambers, who had been the leader of that particular cell in Washington, D.C. These aren't, by the way, this isn't a study group. These are people who are pulling information out and sending it back to the Soviet Union. And they had infiltrated many various different...
Including the Catholic Church.
Including the Catholic Church.
Big time.
Oh, yeah.
Big time.
And...
which led to that whole adoption.
That's right.
Of Vatican II.
So Hiss... So Whittaker Chambers names Hiss because he's the one he's the up and comer, the most promising of them all. He's in the State Department, not in agriculture or something, and they ignore him, because we're concentrating on fascists now. We're not worried about communists. So by 1945, they're kind of easing him out of the State Department because they know that he's a Soviet agent, right? Mm-hmm. And for the Roosevelt/Truman administration, the real issue isn't that we have a Soviet agent in our fold. It's that we'll get caught having a Soviet agent in our fold. We'll get busted. So they ease him out in the State Department, and he ends up as the founding Secretary General of the United Nations. Now it's getting a little hot on Alger Hiss. Okay, we know he's a Soviet agent. We know he's been feeding secrets to the nation that has now declared us the main enemy, the Glasny Vog or whatever. And what job do we get him? Boy, this gets right into your theories. How about head of the Carnegie Endowment for Peace? Right, that's where they put him. Right, head of the Carnegie Endowment, which is a huge enterprise whose mission, actually from the very beginning in this case, although I'm sure they corrupted it along the way, was to one world government, basically.
Yes. And
then there's Alger Hiss. And he stays there until 1948. So for 3 years, he's heading the Carnegie. He was really just a temporary guy at the State Department, at the United Nations, but it tells you where they're going. The guy who gets him the job is Dean Acheson, who's the Assistant Secretary of State. I mean, he's obviously doesn't see any problem with putting a Stalinist agent in the Carnegie Foundation. And then Richard Nixon. And this is why they hated Nixon, because he blows the whistle on Alger Hiss at these hearings. Whittaker Chambers is subpoenaed. He comes out. He testifies again. Didn't want to do it. He had, carved out a good career for himself. And that led to really the most exciting and dramatic trial in American history. And one we're not allowed to see ever reenacted on TV, because Hiss eventually gets caught lying. I mean, and they catch him on a perjury rap because it's the term of limitations. It was the statute of limitations that's expired on spying or whatever. But great trial, and that's the people who seeded.
That got memory hold.
Yeah, right. Who seeded these organizations, though? Who you'll find people like that at the root of so many foundations. So many.
What's this one foundation? I was thinking about it yesterday because I was in the car and I had the AM radio on, and you notice that if you're listening to a conservative talk radio station, any one of the shows, when these public service announcements from the radio foundation or whatever the hell it's called, I can't remember that, the ad council, okay?
Right.
They come on, they're all leftist claptrap stuff.
Right.
Every one of them.
Inclusive.
Yeah, and
Equity.
inclusivity. Oh, I can't believe I talked to a person who is different from me. I know. We had the conversation like two humans on a phone. It was incredible. We're all like connected as one. And I'm like, don't they know that the people that are listening to this station think this is absolute bullshit?
Right. I hope they do. They don't care.
They don't care. They just run one after the other.
There's no downside.
Only you can prevent forest fire. Oh, well.
I'm going to tell you one more story about an institute with which I'm familiar. And since, again, I have personal involvement with this story. And this is an institute. It's the Chautauqua Institute, which is a educational religious institute. Its main place is in Western New York, near where I spend my summer. And then so I've been going there for forever as just a visitor. They have a summer program. And it all seems so benign on the surface, lectures, training, teaching, and they have ballet and opera and stuff like that. So, movie theater and stuff, and a lake. But
those initiations, whoa!
Those, you come away with those branding irons. Big brand.
So what kind of bad stuff were they up to?
Well, it had been creeping to the left for years. Mm-hmm. It was founded as, and it's still ostensibly a Christian enterprise, right? And then in the year 2000, they hired this woman who I was familiar with as head of the religious department, which is there a very powerful position. Her name is Joan Brown Campbell. She had been head of the World Council of Churches.
Oh, there's another one for you.
Honestly, a totally Marxist thing. And she had made a sort of publicity splash by being the liaison between Castro and the Clinton administration and extricating Elian Gonzalez out of little 6-year-old Elian back from away from his family, where his father had sent him to escape the clutches of growing up in, and his mother died on the route to Miami. Right. This is back when the left hated refugees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because they're Cubans, they come to the United States and they're typically vote Republican.
Yeah, they vote Republican.
So
bad.
they grew up in a socialist paradise, so they knew what it was like.
Yep.
So you remember that whole saga.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this is a classic news moment, but Joan Brown Campbell was the one who was serving as the liaison, right, to get him back to Castro. Okay, here you are, this head of divinity or religion at this Christian institute, and your goal now is to return this kid to this godless hellhole, right? So he could grow up as a total, agnostic, atheist, pagan. And he'll be a very public figure there because he's now so prominent. And this was in 1999, 2000. Al Gore started getting bad vibes about the whole thing because he knew it was going to cost him Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it did, but barely. And so she leaves that gig and comes to Chautauqua in 2000 and instantly pushes it hard to the left. And her foot in the door there, her initiative was, and it's odd the way they work. It's a Brahmahamic initiative where, we talked about this before, where Christians and Jews and Muslims are now equally valid.
Relativism.
Right, there it is. And so Christianity is now just another religion. And so I ran into this. I think I talked about this once earlier, where I spoke about how Christians are treated differently, conservative Christians are treated differently than are Muslims by the media. For the same, they can have the same beliefs, and one are horrible right-wingers, and others are, adherents of the religion of peace. So I get banned, and then in the 20 years since, it's been one initiative after another, one step left after another. You can just see it happening. And then groups on the grounds who own property there form coalitions to try to stop this. And I've been involved in that too. And there's one that's semi-effective. It's Advocates for a Balanced Chautauqua. They can't even have Christian in their title anymore or anything. They've just been so neutralized. The people who would have supported it, some of the moneyed people, been scared out of it, intimidated, pressured out of it. And the left keeps pushing. And they cloak themselves, like you say, with those terms like equity and diversity, inclusivity, environmental consciousness, whatever else they've got going for them. And it's very hard to resist.
Yeah, in fact, I made some notes about that. I can't remember the term for that, but that implied threat that the suppressionists.
Yeah,
they are suppressionists.
Right.
That's the big tool they use, and that's where the white hat, high horse, and halo comes into play.
Yeah.
Because they will make people look bad if they disagree with it, because they have the moral high ground, and no matter how legitimate the cause is when it starts, whether it's the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, Catholic Charities,
right.
The Chautauquan Institute, they all fall.
They all fall. And, what happens is, I just going back to Elian, just thinking about the way this works, because they can't do this without the full support of the media.
And the government.
Right. So, for instance, a major misstep in the year 2000 during an election year that the Clinton administration makes is to allow a photographer to take a picture of this armed gunman. Remember this? With his gun, like an AR-15 or something, pointed at Elian, who's being held by this woman, right? And he's
kind of
frightened.
Remember that, yeah.
Well, and won the Pulitzer Prize that year for Best Photo. It was an amazing capture of a moment. That appeared on the cable news sites that morning. By that afternoon, gone. Here's Elian reunited with his father, happy pictures back. It was amazing how they made a prize-winning photo disappear in hours, right?
Wow.
So they preserved for the sheep of America the image that they wanted to hold, right? And that was in 2000. That was 22 years ago. They still were able to control that to a large degree. Even back then, they were able to control it. Let me give you one more example of wonderful infiltration story. And this is it's so perfect. Jim Jones.
Mm-hmm.
He's a communist at the University of Indiana, and he's written memoir. And he says, how can I best spread the communist message in the United States? I know what I'll do. I'll do it through the churches, right? So he becomes a pastor as a front to spread communism. There's probably 100 other people like him. We just don't know because they're not as extreme, or they're more subtle, or they're more effective.
I'd say tens of thousands.
Yeah. And so for him, religion was a front.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't even like he was tempted by communism. He entered the field as a full-blown communist. He comes to California. He starts out in some rural place, but he moves to San Francisco because he realized he could have more impact. And he has thousands now of largely black parishioners who, as we see in a year or so, will be willing to die for him. They're certainly willing to knock on doors and hand out flyers and put in yard signs with multiple thousands of people in San Francisco. He was courted by every major Democratic player in that city, including up to Jimmy Carter. Rosalind Carter came to visit him. Jerry Brown. They all came calling. Willie Brown. Because he was a vote harvester of the highest order, right? The year before he takes his flock to Guyana, he wins the Humanitarian of the Year award in California, right? And
I love that.
And his memoir he's writing about, he goes, I don't know how they didn't know I was a communist. He goes, because at the church services they would sing, free at last, thank socialism almighty, we're free at last. And he was a little crazy too. And like all cult leaders, he realized that he could, part of the goal was to have sex.
Yeah,
right. Although he was also bisexual, so he was effing everything that moved. Only white ones, though, which is interesting.
Really?
Yeah, right. He had the white core, the leadership core was all white. I mean, that's the way these things work. They're so exploitative. It's sad. They end up fleeing the United States because authorities are beginning to catch on that they're basically it's the resistance is being initiated by parents whose children have been kidnapped. When the family split, they go to set up this communist hellhole in Guyana, where it's the villages are named like Che Village and Lenin Village. I mean, it was open now. It was and then he leads his crew through rehearsals for White Night when the visitors would come, and they succeed in killing close to 1,000 people in his mass suicide / murder. 250 kids are killed. They didn't commit suicide. 3-year-olds don't commit suicide. 3-year-olds are murdered. And what did they do with these kids?
Didn't they all get the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, they might as well.
Oh, no, it was Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid. In fact, we joke about Kool-Aid now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're joking about a mass murder of 250 children.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Killed by a white communist.
Mm-hmm.
And they take the bodies, and do you know where they are? No one does. They're beyond identification because their parents are all there dead with them, right? And they don't get to them for weeks. They're rotting in the jungle. So they pick up all the bodies of the children, and they bury them in a mass grave in the Evergreen Cemetery in Oakland. And I don't think there's a black person in America who knows that.
Well, this is one white guy who didn't know it.
Yeah, well, you're allowed to not know it because you're not a social justice warrior, right?
True that.
But you would think that if you were teaching in schools about how evil white people were and how they committed genocide on black people, you'd want to know about a guy who led to the murder of nearly 1,000 of them, and in cahoots with all the leading Democratic lights of that time. Some of them are still out and about,
And what's the name of that church foundation? The one we were talking about.
World
Loose
Council of
Allegiance.
Churches?
Yeah.
Totally Marxist organization.
I'm sure he was a big player in that.
He would have been an all-star. He would have been an MVP. He'd been an all-star team. Okay, what did you guys do this year? Hey, speak up here. Tell us what kind of year you had. Well, hey, you guys thought you just, flipped a few people. Man, I got. Let me tell you my stories. I'm the man. I got to. Not only that, but I'm getting all the whatever on the side that I want. And I just my hair dye bills are pretty expensive, but otherwise I'm doing well here. So.
Oh, he did have a bad dye job. He put those shades on. He looked pretty cool.
I said
he looked like a cross between old Elvis and Wayne Newton. Kind of had that.
There was that Elvis
vibe.
Complex, But we'll have to do a show on Elvis sometime, It's, now that we've revealed all these horrible facts about the things that people trusted before, but they're out there and they're in. It's hard today to be paranoid.
It is because you're always right.
Yeah, you're right too often. Yeah. So I used to think you were like just a harbinger of doom and gloom.
Mm-hmm.
But now you seem like sort of
I remember there were a couple of instances you said, I won't doubt you again. What you said happened this weekend to me.
Yeah, no, you're right. However, I think we should still retain because I get hit with this all the time. It really bugs me when I see it online or on Twitter. Oh, we've lost our civilization. It doesn't matter if we vote. Of course it does. Why bother getting up in the morning if you're not going to fight and resist this,
But I will reiterate that when you are a republic in name only, you're still the United States of America. You still vote. You still do all that stuff.
Right.
It's just that when the level of corruption of every institution becomes so pervasive that a majority of the citizens of the country start looking at anything of value as being illegitimate because so many people gained their status illegitimately that it corrodes the very core of the nation. And I think that they're very close to that tipping point.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I wouldn't deny that at all. And
That's just where equity slips in from equality.
Yeah.
When you say, equity, isn't that great? Well, most of us would go, hell no, it's not great. It's communism. But if you say, well, isn't equity great? And you're looking around and everybody's hooked up with the government or a foundation or they're crooked or they're scamming or they got a dole, they got a freebie, they got a bailout, they got this, they got that, they got a write-off, they got this. And pretty soon you go, yeah, equity sounds more fair than this crap.
Yeah. Well, when you do, as my hometown did, replace the Christopher Columbus statue with the statue of George Floyd, we're close to that tipping point. Man.
It is. So
and thus,
it can't be dismissed.
It's all the more important for the Upstream with Cashill and Edge to set the record straight and to give a little bit of a good cheer and hope as we move into the goodly year of 2023. So until next time, Mr. Edge.
Until that time, Mr. Cashill, thank you. Good day.